My name is Desiree Mobet, and I'm the director of the Alden House Historic Site. And for those of you on Zoom land, I want to welcome our members whose support helps make programs like this possible. Today, we're honored to welcome Stephen O'Neill, a wonderful historian who has been instrumental in helping the Alden House reinterpret some of its archaeological artifacts, which are currently on display. And Stephen also, as we know, here has a long history of just great research into the 17th and 18th century of this area. So we're very excited to be able to share a little bit more about Judah Alden, whose service really ran all the years of the Revolutionary War, came back, was a merchant, and certainly involved in the local politics, but also served as president of the Massachusetts Society of Cincinnati, whose support helped make this program possible. And as a special shout out to the family of Paul Clemente, a recently deceased member of the Alden Kindred and a longtime board member, Paul had the distinction of holding the Judah Alden seat at the Society of the Cincinnati. So big hello to the Clemente family. Without further ado, we'll turn it over to Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Desiree. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been a rather interesting research project for me. It ties up a lot of my previous work. Years ago, I was at the curator and associate director at Pilgrim Hall Museum, where many Alden pieces were, and doing the 17th century archaeology exhibit at the Alden House put me back into the 17th century, even though I'm working up at Hanover, the director of the historical society there. And I've recently become the director of the Dyer Library in Abington. And then this brought me back to the 18th century with some a wonderful image from Pilgrim Hall. So everything in my life is kind of circular. And this presentation tonight, when I was trying to think of how to approach this subject, I was captivated by the portraits. There are two portraits of Judah Alden, and that sort of makes the framework for tonight's presentation. I tried thinking of it as, what is a portrait? A portrait can be considered as a representation, either visual or literary, of an individual. You think the famous portraits, Mona Lisa, one of the most famous of all time. If you pull up a dollar bill, everybody recognizes the little Athenaeum portrait of George Washington. So we're surrounded by portraits, both visual and literary. And it seemed a natural way to frame this story tonight by looking at both the portraits as well as the military career of Judah Alden. This is the one that we start with. This, according to, is reproduced. If anybody finds the original, give me a call. We'll split the money with you. But the original has been lost for some time. We've been looking around for it. But this was reproduced in Justin Windsor's Memorial History of Boston, 1881. That's the big, wonderful 4-volume history of the city of Boston. And according to the description there, it is a sketch of Judah Alden done by Tadeusz Kosciuszko during the winter of Valley Forge. There's just so much going on with that. Here's this wonderful little sketch, this wonderful little profile. Valley Forge, of course, is one of those great epics, moments in American history that everybody seems to know. Everybody knows about the horrible winter at Valley Forge. Tadeusz Kosciuszko, most people probably haven't heard of him, but he was a Polish engineer and soldier who came and served with the American Continental Army, like a lot of other foreign nationals who served on the American side during the war. So this was where I started the research, looking at Alden. And what I found is that his connections to so many leading figures and events during the Revolution was really extraordinary. And this is the portrait of a much older Judah Alden that is in the collections of Pilgrim Hall Museum. It is a magnificent portrait. done by Cephas Giovanni Thompson around 1831, 1835. And it is when he is president of the Massachusetts Society of the Cincinnati. The Cincinnati are the officers from the Continental Army who then formed this organization that has continued down to this day, passing from one person to one person. The Cincinnati is named after the Roman general Cincinnatus, who supposedly left his plow in the field to go defend Rome, and then when he had defeated the invaders, was offered the crown. But he said, I want to return to my fields, to my plow. And the motto of the Cincinnati is Omnia reliquit servare Republicam. He relinquished everything to save the Republic. Now there's this wonderful little detail in this portrait. Over in the far right, just to the right of Judah's left shoulder, it's a little difficult to see here, but it's a small cenotaph. It's a granite block with a little granite pyramid on top. And when you see the original up close, it reads, in memory of Washington. Here is this old veteran who is in this organization with other veterans of the Revolution. And here he is being portrayed, as this proper gentleman from the 1830s. And he also has a very striking appearance. One of the interesting aspects is he seems to have a rather large nose. Remember that for when we finish this talk. It'll come back. So Judah was born right around the corner here. Let's hit that way. Over at the Alden house on October 31st, 1750. His parents were Colonel Briggs Alden and Mercy Wadsworth Alden. He was descended from Mayflower passengers John Alden, Priscilla Mullins, through their son, Captain Jonathan Alden, who inherited the house, his wife, Abigail Hallett Alden, through their son, Colonel John Alden, and his wife, Hannah Briggs Alden, and then who were the parents of Briggs Alden, Judah's parents. I should have made out like a little diagram. Those are always far better for this. But these were all the owners and the residents and inhabitants of the old Alden house, down through the 17th and into the 18th century. Now there's his father, there's Colonel Briggs Alden. Judah was one of 10 children, as you see. An older brother, John, died when he was a young man on a sailing vessel coming back from Casco, Maine. And so Judah was about 16 years old when he lost his older brother. But Judah, Nathaniel, Samuel, and Amherst, the remaining 4 boys, would all serve in some role during the Revolution. Their father, Colonel Briggs Alden, was a leading figure here in Duxbury. He was a representative to the Great and General Court. And in 1765, during the Stamp Act crisis, Briggs Alden is that representative. And the town of Duxbury, in protest against the Stamp Act, send to Briggs Alden this message. To Briggs Alden, Esquire, representative of the inhabitants of the town of Duxborough in the Great and General Court of the province of Massachusetts Bay in New England. Sir, whilst all America is in a ferment, and every patriotic breast is glowing with resentment at the heavy and intolerable burdens imposed upon us by the late act lately passed in Parliament, we, your constituents, the freeholders and other inhabitants of the ancient and first incorporated town Duxborough, enjoin and instruct you that you neither directly nor indirectly be aiding, favoring, countenancing, assisting, or in any ways instrumental in promoting the putting the said act in execution. Duxborough is very much on the patriot side. We hope you oppose the same with all the eloquence and address you are master of, and that you use your utmost endeavors to vindicate our previous rights and privileges, those privileges for which our forefathers bled, for which those heroic spirits bid adieu to the tyrannical government, to the ill-boding name of the Stuarts, traveled the vast Atlantic and sat down in these then deserts of America, and for which, sir, we their descendants esteem dearer to us than our lives. Judah is growing up at a time of the revolutionary ferment, when the protests start in Boston. They quickly spread to the other colonies against the Stamp Act and other acts, very much on the patriot cause, patriot side. So in the household of Colonel Briggs Alden, his father, Judah is aware of the Boston Massacre on March 5th, 1770, December 16th, 1773, the Boston Tea Party, and in March of 1774, the port of Boston is closed, the Boston Port Act. Boston is still one of the top 10 ports inside in the entire British Empire at this time, and to close it off entirely puts a stranglehold on most of New England. And Judah is an ensign in the Duxbury Minute Company under Captain Isaac Alden, his kinsman. In 1775, as things start to come to a head, Captain Nesbitt Balfour, which is just a wonderful British name, Nesbitt Balfour, and 100 soldiers of the 4th Regiment arrive in Marshfield. They are protecting several leading Tories over in Marshfield. Most of the South Shore towns are very much on the patriot side. The number of loyalists is fairly low by comparison. There are several families in Marshfield, Plymouth, Judge Peter Oliver at his magnificent Oliver Hall in Middleborough. But most of the inhabitants of these towns are patriots. Captain Balfour frequently makes trips down to Plymouth, where several people start insulting him. It's really a tough time for the soldiers who are here. Then, of course, April 19th, the battles of Lexington and Concord. 250 years ago, next April. On April 20th, Colonel Cotton, Theophilus Cotton, the leading militia figure in Plymouth, holds a council of war at the Alden House, in the parlor of the Alden House, with Colonel Briggs Alden. The militia companies start to arrive from several towns. They're going to march on Marshfield to engage the British troops who are over there under Captain Balfour. There's some quibbling, some prevaricating, some waiting, but when they finally head over on April 21st, the militia companies have already made arrangements. They evacuate Marshfield, they get on board some ships, the Tories with them, and they head back up to Boston. Think of it, there could have been, the third battle of the American Revolution right down the road. It would have been a smaller one, but it could have been right here. This is a small detail from the original muster roll of Captain George Partridge's company here in Duxbury, Colonel Theophilus Cotton's regiment, April 1775. A muster roll of Minute Company under the command of Captain George Partridge, Colonel Cotton's regiment, which marched in reference to the alarm of April 19th, 1775. You can see it's listing George Partridge, Captain, Andrew Sampson, Lieutenant, Judah Alden, Second Lieutenant. He's a young man of about 24 years old when the war breaks out. And he is Second Lieutenant in this company. And you can see it's all the usual names for Duxbury: Loring, Wadsworth, Alden, Sampson, Bradford, Chandler. It's like all the names of the streets around here, right? So these muster rolls are found in many collections. Hanover has one that I know of for the North Minute Company. Most of them were assembled literally the day after Lexington and Concord. News had reached here in these towns very quickly about the fighting and about summoning the militia companies up to Boston. So Judah will serve with Colonel John Bailey of Hanover. Since I run the Hanover Historic Society, I have to throw Colonel Bailey in there. I have to mention him. He's commanding officer of the 2nd Massachusetts Regiment. Now, the numbers change during the war, but we can refer to it as the 2nd Mass for convenience sake. Colonel Bailey serves from 75 till 80. He's the highest ranking officer from Hanover. But Judah will serve all 8 years of the war, from 1775 until 1783. He will serve through November of 1783. 8 years of warfare. The regiment is involved in some of the leading events of the American Revolution. The Siege of Boston, the whole New York campaign, the Delaware Crossing, battles of Trenton and Princeton, battles of Saratoga, the Winter Valley Forge, Battle of Monmouth, and Yorktown. Judah serves and is a participant in almost all of this. Well, what happens first is from April 1775 until the following March, it's the Siege of Boston. Boston is that tadpole-shaped thing right there in the middle of the map. And all around it are encircling armies. Washington, once he is named head of the Continental Army, will make his headquarters over in Cambridge, the vassal Longfellow House. And General John Thomas, who's from Marshfield, will have his troops stationed down in Roxbury. They set up fortifications ringing the city. This is when the Battle of Bunker Hill occurs. They attempt to settle fortifications in Charlestown, on Breed's and Bunker's Hill, right above the village of Charlestown, and that's when the famous Battle of Bunker Hill takes place. Dorchester Heights, down here, what is now South Boston, that will be the key to getting the British out of the city. As you can see, Castle Island is still a Castle Island at this time, and Dorchester Flats, Back Bay is still a Back Bay at this time, still a muddy flat. So you can see how Dorchester would be, if you had cannon up there, you'd be able to attack Castle Island and attack any ships sailing into the harbor. So June 17th, Battle of Bunker Hill, in the Siege of Boston. Everybody wants to say, oh, he was at Bunker Hill. Well, no, he wasn't. There were a lot more troops down in Roxbury and Dorchester Heights, because there was a real fear that while that battle was going on, the British would also attack to the south, either through Boston Neck or over the water. So a lot more troops were stationed all around that were engaged in the battle. In July, Judah is commissioned second lieutenant. In January 1st, 1776, he is promoted to first lieutenant. Also in January, the little pamphlet Common Sense by Thomas Paine is published. Up until this time, most colonists were still trying to figure a way to stay within the empire. They still wanted to stay British. Very few had been talking about independence until Thomas Paine's little pamphlet really sort of made the argument clear. We're Americans, we're a new nationality, a new nation. We deserve a new state in the world. On March 4th and 5th, Dorchester Heights are fortified. The cannon that Henry Knox's train of artillery had brought from Ticonderoga, all the way, during the winter, all the way from Ticonderoga in upstate New York, all through Massachusetts, finally arrived. Washington orders Dorchester Heights to be fortified. General Thomas's regiment are the ones that do this. So most likely, the Mass Second with Judah participate in this event. The British realize that they can no longer stay in Boston, so they plan to leave. March 17th, British evacuate Boston. It's a double holiday for those of us in the city of Boston. It's also St. Patrick's Day, especially if your name's over. But it was literally a tactical retreat. The British realized they couldn't hold Boston. They sailed up to Halifax, but made plans to sail back to New York. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is signed by the representatives at the Continental Congress, declaring colonies to be free and independent as the United States. And here we see a commission, actually it's a little bit later on, from the Duxbury Rural Historical Society, promoting Judah Alden to captain. For most of the war, he will serve as a captain in the Continental Army. The rest of 1776 are rough for the American cause. When the British arrive in New York, they are there to stay. In August through October is the New York campaign. August 27th is the Battle of Long Island and Brooklyn Heights. It's one of the largest battles of the American Revolution. It is a British victory. The Americans lose. September 16th, the Battle of Harlem Heights. The Americans have retreated back from Long Island and retreated up through the island of Manhattan. They are defeated once again. September 21 to 23, the Great Fire of New York. Most of the old city of New York burns. It's still unclear who might have set that blaze going. And October 29th, the Battle of White Plains sort of pushes Washington and the Continental Army out of the east side of the Hudson River near New York City. November 16th, the final battle of Fort Washington falls to the British and Hessian forces. The British are now in full control of the island of Manhattan. They will not leave until 1783. So this is important because a lot of us, most Americans would probably have, if you ask them about the American Revolution, they can tell you Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill. They'll probably tell you they crossed the Delaware, then there's Yorktown, or there's a horrible winter at Valley Forge. Very few of people will realize that there was ongoing warfare around New York throughout the entire war. It was constant skirmishing, constant small fights, constant assaults from British based in New York up towards Connecticut, towards New Jersey, as far away as New Bedford is burned during the war. Washington and the Continental Army, including the mass second with Judah Alden, retreat across New Jersey. And in late December 1776, they need something to boost morale. They need a victory of some kind. So on the night of December 25th, 26th, Christmas Day, crossing of the Delaware, the mass second is in General Glover's brigade. That's General John Glover. He is from Marblehead. And famously, it was his regiment, all the fishermen that he brought with him from Marblehead, who were put in the small boats, the scows that crossed the Delaware that night. They knew the Hessians had been celebrating Christmas, being good Hessians, they were all drunk. So they crossed the river and attacked Trenton the following day. It was an American victory. It was also a strategic victory in the sense that a lot of the enlistments for a lot of the Continental soldiers were going to be up as of December 31st. Washington needed some form of victory so that these men would re-enlist. In doing research for this, it's astonishing how many enlistment records there are. Multiple lists of men for 3 months, 6 months, 3 years. And you find them in so many different collections. On January 1st, Judah Alden is commissioned a captain. He is now a captain of a company in the Massachusetts 2nd Regiment. On January 3rd, the Battle of Princeton, New Jersey is another American victory. And then there's the Morristown, New Jersey winter encampment. Morristown is actually the winter encampment twice during the war. And people tend to forget that most of the fighting happens in either the summer or the early fall. Most of the big battles. Both sides sort of hunker down for the winters. Now, being a captain of a company, it looks something like this muster roll here. From April of 1775 to July of 1780, Judah Alden is in command of a company of light infantry. Now, this is significant. Light infantry are lightly armored, mobile. They are the shock troops. They're the ones sent in on stealthy missions. They're the Navy SEALs of the Revolution. They're the Rangers. They're the ones who go in first. This muster roll comes from the BPL up in Boston, and it's a roll of a company from Seth Drew's company, Colonel John Bailey's 2nd Regiment. Loudon's Ferry, New York, September 7th, 1777. And you can see how it's made up of 3 officers, Seth Drew, a couple others, 3 sergeants, 3 corporals, 1 drummer, 1 fifer, 47 privates. This is roughly typical of most of the companies in the regiment throughout the war. And I want to point out a couple of things about this one. On the, under where it says privates, the second name down is Prince Bailey. And over on this side, down almost towards the bottom, there's a name Cuff Tilden. They were black soldiers. They were both former slaves who lived in Hanover. They had been enslaved before the war, and here they are serving in the Continental Army. The Continental Army was integrated. You have dozens of black soldiers, dozens of Native American soldiers serving alongside white soldiers, particularly in the Massachusetts regiments. There's been some great research done on these men. Prince Bailey, in particular, serves 3 years during the war. He is at some of the fiercest fighting in the war, comes back to Hanover, marries a woman, and they move up to become Leeds, Maine. And he gets a pension years later. He applies for a pension. Cuff Tilden is a young man. Unfortunately, he will die at Valley Forge. He was 22 years old. And he's buried there in all the unmarked graves of the soldiers who perished during that winter. It's interesting to note that a lot of the towns around here sent a good number of black soldiers alongside the white soldiers in the regiments. So light infantry companies, drawn from each regiment, lightly equipped, mobile, and here you can see their uniform. And what's interesting is pay close attention to the cap, if you remember that sketch of Judah Alden to begin with. There's a wonderful little research article by a man named John Hannigan that is online, where he looks specifically at this little sketch of Judah Alden and thinks, maybe it wasn't done at Valley Forge, maybe it was done when he was in charge of a light infantry company. And he writes that the cap depicted in the sketch is one typically associated with 18th century light infantry. Fits tightly on the head with a small visor protecting over the eyes, as well as a shield affixed to the front. Cap is adorned with feathers and what appears to be a hair crest running down the center. So these are the short little caps, and they've got this neat little leather visor. These are associated with, in particular, the Corps of Light Infantry under General Anthony Wayne. In 1779, Wayne admonished the Virginia Light Companies for being the only troops in the light infantry that has not procured hair for their caps. Little like horsehair decorations on the top of the hats. On October 23rd, general orders again noted that some companies were still guilty of some neglect with regard to the caps and clothes of part of his troops, which others have in course of 2 or 3 days after joining the Corps fully complied with. There was a particular mode of dress. The cap and cloth wings attached on Alden's shoulders, as depicted in the sketch, were unique to the light division. So the image of the sketch was probably done after Valley Forge, when Judah Alden was a captain with the Light Infantry Corps, and the image like that, and the uniform like that. So the second mass is at the battles of Saratoga, which are a series of battles in September and October. It is a stunning American victory where General Gates defeats General Burgoyne of the British, and the entire British Army surrenders. This is the turning point of the war. This is the big battle that gets France to decide to join on the American side against their old enemy, Britain. It is, of course, well known as one of the great American victories. The winter encampment at Valley Forge is famous to almost everyone. The encampment lasted from December of 77 to March of 78. It was difficult because they were so ill supplied. They had to build little log cabins like that. And of course, it becomes the stuff of legend. The soldiers marching barefoot in the snow becomes part of the iconography of the American Revolution. The second mass is also at the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey, June 28, 1778. This is sort of a stalemate battle between the British and the Americans. It is also June 28th. That's a hot time in New Jersey. They're fighting in wool uniforms with the heat of the battle, with the cannons exploding. And it is one of those ones that, again, comes into legend and the mythology of the revolution, where General Washington has to rally the troops in against his other officers who are not following the orders. And this is also the famous one for Molly Pitcher. So we've got all these sort of interesting names associated with these battles that the Mass Second is being involved with. And here's the sort of interesting thing about the Mass Second Regiment with Judah Alden. Starting on November 2nd, the regiment is stationed at West Point. Remember how I said the British are holding New York City? So West Point is the narrows on the Hudson River. It is the key to keeping the British from heading upriver and inland even more, or coming down. So West Point is a key spot and has to be defended. It is also a good base of operations for sending out raids down towards Manhattan, for engaging the British at various points around New York City, up towards Connecticut, down towards New Jersey. This is where the whole Washington's spies network is based. The chain there in the front is the famous giant chain that they actually stretch across the Hudson, pieces of which are still in existence on the campus of West Point Academy, the military academy. They put that there to block British ships from coming up. The Massachusetts Second will be based here in West Point and around the Highlands for much of the rest of the war. In March and April of '79, the Massachusetts line is reorganized. They go from 15 regiments to 9. 8 of them are regular line regiments, but 1 light infantry company drawn from the other regiments. Now, the light infantry will often be attached to a different battalion as needed. So Judah Alden and his light infantry company that he's in charge of will be attached to various other companies throughout the rest of the war. They're stationed at West Point, Hudson Highlands. They do garrison duty for the next 13 months, 1780. Garrison duty means manning the forts, finding supplies, wintering down up there, and then leading out skirmishes and following all the orders being sent from Washington's headquarters. In June, the Light Company's battalion under Major William Hull sent to White Plains, where they try to engage the British. And in July, the Light Company joins General Anthony Wayne's Corps of Light Infantry. There's Anthony Wayne, General Wayne, in a nice little pastel by James Sharples from after the war. On July 16th, there's the Battle of Stony Point in New York. This is an interesting battle. Oh, hey, I repeated a few things. This is an interesting battle because it shows exactly how the light corps works, how the light infantry works. They approach at night British fortifications on the western side of the Hudson River. British have fortifications, they have cannon, they're good to defend this upland position. But the light infantry comes in under cover of darkness. Oh, they're each given a ration of rum beforehand, little Dutch courage. But they approach the fort. They split into 3 columns. They're under the command of General Wayne. They split into 3 columns. And while 2 of them sneak up, one of them starts to engage the British this way so that the other ones can attack the fort, having been unnoticed. The battle lasts 30 minutes. The Americans take the fort. It happens at about 2 in the morning. So this is sort of the lightning fast guerrilla strike that the Light Infantry Corps is famous for. The fort and garrison with Colonel Johnson, the British commanding officer, are ours. Our officers and men behaved like men who were determined to be free. General Wayne. That was his report to General Washington. So this is, most people probably have never heard of the Battle of Stony Point, but this is one of those small battles that means a lot to boost morale of all the troops encircling New York. And Judah Alden is involved with his light company. Now, it's about this time, somewhere in late '79, early 1780, that Judah Alden is sketched. And that's the fellow over there, Tadeusz Kosciuszko. He is, like I said, a Polish national who has joined with the Americans. There are dozens of foreign nationals who serve in the American army. Lafayette is the most famous, of course, the Marquis de Lafayette. But among Poles, there are not only Kosciuszko, but also Count Casimir Pulaski, who commands a legion of cavalry. And there are dozens of others when you start looking down. Frenchmen, Poles, Baron von Steuben is a Prussian. And being an engineer, Kosciuszko had a habit of making little sketches. Well, like I said, if anybody finds this original, give us a call. This would be great to see the original again. So he's doing this little sketch, and there you can see there's that light infantry cap. It's got the feathers and the hair on the top. You'll notice that Judah doesn't have the typical queue, the tail at the back of his hair. His hair is kind of cut short with some curls. But that is definitely a light infantry outfit that he is wearing. And when I was researching this, it seemed surprising. I thought, maybe this was just a one-off for Kosciuszko, drawing one of his friends. But no, there are others. And one of them is pretty interesting. The one on the right is Gamaliel Bradford, one of Judah Alden's Duxbury neighbors, who was also serving in the Continental Army. That is up at the Houghton Library at Harvard. And you can see these are tiny. I mean, they're only like 2-3 inches tall. They're small little miniatures. This is Gamaliel Bradford on the right, a little watercolor and pencil and paper. The one on the left is General Enoch Poor. He was from New Hampshire. And you can see the profile is similar to the one of Judah Alden, but he's obviously wearing a different hat, part of a different regiment. There are probably a few more out there, if anybody can find them. I mean, this would be a great little sort of investigation to see if any more of Kosciuszko's artwork can be found. And like I said, these are tiny. In 1780, personal life intrudes into the military career of Judah Alden. In January, the Light Corps is dissolved. It's wintertime, and the light companies rejoin their regular regiments. They've been moving sort of around with the different groups in the battalions. And on February 17th, here in Duxbury, Judah marries Wealthea Wadsworth. He is 29 years old, the dashing captain of a military company. Wealthea is 20 years old when they get married. Their marriage will last 61 years. I'm going on 26. 61's a long time. The question I always have when I look at this is, how did Judah get back here to Duxbury? If he is part of the light company that's dissolved in January, does he walk all the way from West Point, Tarrytown, somewhere around there, all the way back to Duxbury? Chances are he's not traveling by water because the British are patrolling New York Harbor and Long Island Sound. So my guess is Judah Alden maybe borrowed a horse, maybe walked the old Boston Post Road up through, either along the coast, up through Providence, through Hartford, through Springfield, through Boston to get back home so that he can get married. It's sort of an interesting little side note that here, this, as far as I can see or prove, this is his only real furlough during the entire 8 years that he serves during the American Revolution. And he obviously can only stay for a little while. In July, the Light Corps of Infantry is reorganized by Baron von Steuben. So he is back with the soldiers at West Point by July. Of course, December, their first child, Lucia, is born. He probably does not see his first child. She's born 1780. As far as I can tell, he doesn't come back till the end of 1783. For the first 3 years of his little girl's life, he is not around. He is serving in the war. One of the remarkable things about the American Revolution is how many manuscript sources are still existing. This is the orderly book up at Mass Historical Society. It's about 75 pages, all in Judah's handwriting of his command at Dobbs Ferry, November 12th, 1780. He talks about who's put on guard duty, who's put on other duties. And of course, he's practicing his signature at the bottom of every page. This one has this wonderful swirly at the bottom. So it is not great reading, but it's the day-to-day details. And I only skimmed through many of the pages just to get a sense of what it is, but it is, the sort of daily grind of military life. It is the guard duties, it's finding provisions, it's assigning different tasks to the company, it's following the orders that come down from up above. Dobbs Ferry is along the Hudson, near West Point and those other cities. And interestingly enough, this is a copy of a letter in the Library of Congress in the Manuscript Division. It is in the Washington Papers. This is a letter from Judah Alden to George Washington. There are a series of several letters back and forth between Alden and General Washington. This one is dated November 5th, 1780, and Captain Alden writes, "Sir, I impart to you in confidence that I intend to execute an enterprise against Staten Island tomorrow night, for which reason I am desirous of cutting off all intercourse with the enemy on the east side of the river. You will therefore tomorrow at retreat beating, set a guard upon any boats which may be at the slot or Nyack, and not suffer any to go out on any pretense whatever till next morning." Washington is planning an attack on Staten Island, so he doesn't want boats coming down from the Hudson or heading up. So he's assigning to Captain Alden to protect any in the river. "Towards evening, you will send a small party down to the Gloucester landings, and if they find any boats there, you will give orders to have them scuttled in such a manner that they cannot be immediately used. I depend upon the punctual observation of this order that you will keep the motive a secret. Do your duty, basically." And Washington finishes the letter, "Acknowledge the receipt of this, that I may be sure you have got it. I am, sir, your most obedient servant, G. Washington." Washington was back and forth with many of his officers. The volume that I got the transcript of this one out of is some 900 pages, and it's one of about 20 volumes just for the war years. The amount of material, the amount of letters, manuscript material is staggering from the American Revolution. Having worked so much with 17th century, it's really amazing. See, when you think about how relatively little percentage-wise is left from the 17th century as opposed to the 18th. Now in 1781, the light infantry companies is assigned to Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Vose's battalion, Corps of Light Infantry for the Yorktown campaign. Massachusetts 2nd is going to be sent down to the southern theater of the war, where Washington, with the French, hopes to corner Cornwallis, the British Army, and have it surrender. The Light Infantry Division at Yorktown, the line of battle, is under the command of Major General Lafayette. The 1st Brigade in the division is under Peter Muhlenberg. There are 8 battalions from Massachusetts of light infantry. So they've been drawn from the different regiments. They're now under Colonel Joseph Vose, Elijah's brother. 2 more Massachusetts companies under French officer Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Joseph Sorbonnet de Gima. My French is kind of rusty. So and there is the Marquis de Lafayette, obviously one of Washington's favorites, the most famous of the non-Americans who serves with the Continental Army. And he is in charge of this entire light infantry division. So there is Charles Wilson Peel's portrait of Lafayette in American uniform. The several weeks of the siege from September end on October 19th. Lord Cornwallis is bottled up at Yorktown. He's cornered The French fleet has blockaded the Chesapeake. French forces are on one side, American forces are on the other. Cornwallis has no option but to surrender. And what's interesting is at Yorktown, there are a lot of other notable figures that Judah Alden encounters. The Second Brigade were under the commands of General Alexander Scammell of New Hampshire. For those of us who are members of the Old Colony Club in Plymouth, General Scammell was a member of the Old Colony Club when he was a teacher in Plymouth back in the 1770s. So we always have to mention him. General Scammell was the highest ranking American officer who was killed during the Battle of Yorktown. He was brought to the military hospital at the governor's mansion in Williamsburg. And if you go there today, out in back, there's a big green lawn where all the men who died at the hospital during the siege of Yorktown are buried. General Scammell is out there. General Alexander Hamilton is also there at Yorktown, very famous, not just for Broadway, but he's also on the $10 bill. And the duel with Aaron Burr, of course. The second division is under General Benjamin Lincoln of Hingham. General Lincoln is an extraordinary figure. The house that his family lived in up until just a couple of years ago has now been purchased by the Hingham Historical Society. It's being opened as a museum. General Lincoln was the commanding general when Charleston fell to the British. General Lincoln surrendered the city. When Washington heard that Cornwallis did not want to offer the sword of surrender at Yorktown, there's sort of a funny insult. Washington had General Lincoln receive the sword of surrender from the second in command of the British. There is also General Baron von Steuben and Brigadier General Anthony Wayne, the old light infantry commander, and General Washington commanding. Judah Alden has been in contact with Washington since Dorchester Heights, since the siege of Boston. Among the thousands of soldiers, Judah is a leading officer. He is, as far as I know, never wounded during the war. So we'll assume he's a good officer and a good soldier. But he comes into contact with all of these leading figures throughout the war. With Yorktown, that's the last large battle of the war. The war will officially end 2 years later, in 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, where the United States will be accepted as an independent nation. And on November 3rd, 1783, at West Point, the Massachusetts 2nd Regiment is disbanded. Judah Alden receives a brevet commission to major on discharge. A brevet commission means it's award or a recognition of service without necessarily all the authority of the rank. But for the rest of his life, he will be known as Major Judah Alden. And there is his commission that is over in the collections of the Duxbury Rural Historical Society. And I believe that is signed by Benjamin Lincoln himself down there. Major Alden has survived 8 years of warfare, some of the roughest times, some Valley Forge, some of the roughest battles, Monmouth, the battles around New York, and he comes home to Duxbury. This is the manuscript map of Duxbury drawn in 1795. In 1794, Commonwealth of Massachusetts required every town to create a new map of the boundaries of each town, which also includes Maine at the time. So here's the wonderful hand-drawn map of Duxbury. You can see Standish Shores, you can see the Gurnett Point, Duxbury Beach, there's Powder Point, and the Alden homestead right there just behind it. He and Walthea will have 9 more children, 3 of whom unfortunately do not live beyond the age of 10. Disease takes a good number of children still at this time, but they move into a beautiful new home. Apparently he got tired of the old Alden house No offense, Desiree. But he moves into the house right up around the corner. It's a wonderful federal style house around 1790. Late Georgian, early federal style architecture. He sets up a store, a shop. According to the legend, this is where that road, where the, you get that bad curve right there on 3A. Everybody goes flying around, you take your life in your hands trying to make the left turn out of, right around the corner. But he becomes a store owner and a merchant. He is a leading figure here in the town. And for many years, he will be involved in the Society of the Cincinnati. The Cincinnati was formed by by the officers of the Continental Army as sort of a very exclusive group. The positions of each officer can only be inherited by one descendant each time. So the people who are members now can trace themselves back directly to the officers of Washington's army. He's a member of the standing committees in 1799, 1804. He's vice president, 1828 and 29, and president of the society from 1829 until his death in 1845. And what's interesting is in 1824, his old friend Lafayette comes back to the United States on a sort of ceremonial visit. Lafayette is brought all around. And in late August, 1824, Lafayette is up in Boston. There's dances and balls and parties and all sorts of events. He's there for the dedication of the Bunker Hill Monument. And Judah Alden goes to one of these events. And according to the story passed down in the family, I think the wording correct here. Lafayette sees Alden in the audience and calls out, "Alden, how are you? I know you by your nose." Should do that with a French accent, it'd be even funnier. But after all that time, like fellow veterans, like soldiers who hadn't seen each other for a long time, they recognized each other from the time that they served together during the war. It's remarkable that Judah here, you would think he's any sort of, fashionable, wealthy, important gentleman of the 1830s. And yet, as a young man in his 20s, early 30s, he had witnessed some of the worst fighting in the American Revolution, endured hardships that I think few of us can really understand and appreciate. They have, like I said, 10 children. His wife, Wealthea, dies on March 2nd, 1841, when she is 81 years old. And Judah dies at Duxbury, March 2nd, 1845, at the age of 94. He lives a very long time, and he is buried over the Mayflower Cemetery. Now, there are a lot more questions and stories to be told with Judah. One of the things I've discovered in researching anybody is you always come out with more questions than you had going in, as you find, more details. I'd love to know a lot more details about his life, as captain of the light infantry. I'd love to see if there are more objects associated with it, particularly objects from the Revolution that might be floating around somewhere. There's a handful of objects associated with him at the Alden House and at Duxbury Rural Historical. But what happened to his sword? What happened to his, his uniform? Like a lot of those things was sort of lost to history. And also it'd be great if we could find some letters from the Revolutionary time. One of the things that when I used to teach, I would always tell my students, think about how long it took news to travel. We're so used to having a phone and, okay, I just called them. How come they haven't called me back already? We want, instant communication. Imagine trying to send a letter home in 1781 to his wife, when he's in New York and she's here in Duxbury, how long it would take that letter, whether that letter would even get through, going back here. So there's always these great questions. And this is just one story. This is just one portrait, like I said. And what I've found is that with a lot of these old fellows, the wonderful connections make for really fantastic stories. So that is my presentation for this evening. I'll happily take any questions if there are any. Yes, sir.
The size, because I know you had mentioned about, I think, British, General Balfour, that there were 100 men. How much, because I know battalion regiment in today's, you can tell how many soldiers there are. In the Massachusetts second, how many soldiers were there and how much of it was militia and how much was it Continental Army? Is that?
Those statistics do exist. A lot of times, the companies get reformed so often. I actually had a hard time figuring some of that out. And a lot of times they got renamed or disbanded and moved into another one. That muster roll for the one company of about 50 people, that seems fairly typical for an individual company, and then multiply that by 8 or 9 for the regiment, for much of the mass second. So, I can't do the math.
I was just curious, you had said about how in history, all these little battles,
Yeah.
we don't know about, so in conjunction to that, how many men were actually involved in those battles as we're sort of going with it all?
Yeah. The statistics seem to change, obviously as more research comes out, but I do remember that in 1775, there were about 16,000 soldiers from Massachusetts in the Continental Army. The local militias still existed, and whenever there was an alarm, like the Bristol alarm or an alarm at Hull or Situate, the local militias would sort of assemble the minute companies. It was far more typical for doing 3 months service or 6 months service rather than the full 3 years, or like Judah, full 8 years. I mean, that's sort of extraordinary. So yeah, the numbers are always changing. There are one thing, people who really research the revolution are rabid about it. They love those details, and there are wonderful sources about a lot of them.
And one other thing is
Yeah.
just a curiosity, because you had mentioned about, I believe you died, one of the African American or slaves. So now in Norwell, there's a place called Cuffy's Corner. That I think he was a slave or something like
Yeah.
that. So I don't know if there's any relationship.
No relationship that we found. Cuff or Cuffy was actually a fairly common name for a lot of the folk black slaves. Cuffy, Prince, Britain, Boston. There's been a couple of studies on what these people were named. Over in Norwell, the Freeman family was actually founded by Asher, who was a slave before the war, served in the Revolution, like 3 years. And when he was given his freedom, he just picked the name Freeman, because I'm a free man.
Yeah.
And then his descendants went on to serve in the 54th and 55th Civil War. So, yeah, there's some great research being done right now. Wayne Tucker has been doing fantastic research about Black soldiers all throughout these towns around here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stephen, we got a question online.
Okay.
About that. So, let's see, how did you come to discover the freed slaves serving in the indigenous people? And are there, some sort of reference to their ethnicity and the muster rolls?
Yes.
So that's a Zoom question.
Exactly. The muster rolls, a lot of times, will list out details like height, eye color, hair color, complexion. And a lot of times you will see Negro, mulatto, Indian, and that's how you can understand, who these people were. This is long before photo IDs, obviously, and before dog tags. So, and a lot of times in the listings, you'll be able to sort of tell by, names that are a little different, like Cuffy, which was popular for Black slaves. Over in the Dyer Library, there's a list of soldiers from Abington, and one of them is Primus Cobus, or Cobus. And, a little, right after his name, it says Negro. So that's based on a lot of those records, and then comparing it to church records, because a lot of times the slaves before the war would be baptized in the church or married in the church. So you see them in the records, somebody slave of somebody else. So we've been working to sort of create a good census of who these people were. And people are often shocked that there were a lot of slaves in these towns around here. And it was the middle of the revolution, 1780-81, of the Quock Walker and Mumbet, Elizabeth Freeman cases, get the Massachusetts Constitution applied to whether all men are free and equal. So that ends those decisions help end slavery in the Commonwealth.
Can you talk, another question, came in about the training that young officers, junior officers like Judah would have, I mean, how did they really learn skills early on?
Yeah, I wish some of my reenactor friends were here. They do it all the time. The training, it comes out of the militia training, which goes back to the 17th century. The typical is every male between 16 and 60 has to have a musket, has to have powder and shot, have to assemble several times a year, muster days, where they go through the drills. For the officers, I don't know what sort of special training they receive, but certainly they must have had something. Just not sure.
One question about Judah Alden during his residence here in Duxbury in his later life. Did he actually build the Judah Alden, or was the Judah Alden house there?
So far as I know, he built it. It was 1790 is the date traditionally ascribed to it. Chances are he didn't physically build it himself. He might have hired a housewright to come in and build it. But it's definitely about that period. Yeah. And I understand the art complex now. So it's being taken care of. Yes, sir.
Was his store across, the building is still across the street? On Tremont Street, the White House, was that his, where his store?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I came across something about
Yeah.
that.
They moved it across the street, that's where my grandfather had a chicken farm. And they say in their various family writings, all the children were born in Judah Alden's store. So part of that big white house, it's much smaller in the early days, that is part of the Judah Alden store that was moved by, I think it was a Briggs Alden or somebody, a name like that. Could it have been his son or?
Right, there was
Yeah,
a great
there
son,
was
yeah.
Well, let's see.
So that makes me wonder, are there any, have you come across any account books at the store?
Yes, there are some from later on. There are a couple of Judah Alden accounts.
Yeah, they're in a collection of the Historical Society. A lot of spices, tea, rum. Yeah.
Back to his old revolution days.
So were there any surprises that you learned about him?
The biggest surprise is just seeing, how far ranging his military career took him, from Boston during the siege, through New York, through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all the way down to Virginia, and then back. Most of us think it's one or two battles, but the army and the companies are ranging all around us for different assignments. There's a lot of traveling, a lot of very footsore soldiers, I can imagine. So that was really extraordinary, trying to trace out exactly where he was throughout the course of the war.
Is there any truth to the story that he built the store across Alden Path so he'd stop people from going down Alden Path?
I'm not sure about that one. It sounds like something you might do. That's it.
Any other questions? Yeah, I think we're good. I think they're all asked.
Great, thank you all very, very much.